PVC piping is handy for a number of boat projects. It's lightweight, cheap, available everywhere, and it doesn't rust. The only drawback is it's a hassle to cut. Or is it? Hi there, I'm Carolyn Sherlock, and on this episode of the Boat Galley podcast, I share my suggestion for the best tool for cutting PVC pipe. Today's episode of the Boat Galley podcast is sponsored by Lunatic, makers of the hydration spray bottle, odor-free dishcloth, and a self-cleaning washcloth. Lunatic offers practical gear designed to save water and reduce waste. A water bottle that works superbly to rinse dishes, a dishcloth that doesn't get stinky. Yes, please. I've used both ever since they've been out practically. Visit lunaticgear.com to learn more and use code BOATGALLEY to save 10% on everything. Lunatic, innovative gear for your outdoor adventures. Okay, let's talk about PVC. We've used it for a number of boat projects, not actually as piping, but for various things when we needed a rigid tube but didn't want to use stainless. One of my favorites was putting pieces of 4-inch PVC upright in a locker to hold glass bottles like wine or olive oil. Another one we made supports for solar panels winged out around the stern on our first boat. The problem was always cutting the PVC. It just took forever with a hacksaw. And since the hacksaw blade is fairly narrow, it's hard to keep the cut straight. It wanders all over the place. About 10 years ago, I was working on a project and resigned myself to another day of frustration, cutting the PVC with the hacksaw. But as I got the hacksaw out, I knocked another one of our saws down. And as I put it back, I saw it had a nice picture on the cover of someone cutting PVC with it. Figured I'd try it. That couldn't be any worse than the hacksaw. And as I saw it, one phrase kept going through my head. Hot knife through butter. It was so easy. And because it cuts so easily, there was no problem to have straight cuts instead of the meandering curves that I usually made. Also, since it's just as one straight blade instead of that loopty thing that a hacksaw has, there was no problem with getting it all the way through. I was using it on some thin wall PVC for the project, and I wanted to be sure that it wasn't just the thinner wall that made it easier. So I found a piece of scrapped regular wall PVC, and it worked just as well there. What is it, you're asking? It's called a shark pole saw. David bought it when we moved aboard our first boat, K-Tall, and loved it for cutting wood quickly and easily. Neither one of us had thought to use it on PVC before that day, whenever it was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. The package calls it a carpentry saw, and the teeth are larger than those of a hacksaw, which I'm sure helps it cut so much faster and more easily. It is a little bit rougher cut. A few swipes with sandpaper took care of that. No problem. Whereas most saws cut on the push stroke, this one cuts on the pull, which is a more powerful motion for almost anyone. And the blade itself is sharp. Be sure to keep the blade guard on. We've had this saw, 20 years now, because we first got it in 2002. We're still using it, still the same blade, no sharpening. If I remember correctly, I think we originally bought it at Home Depot. I just did a quick check, and they're available on Amazon. You'll find a link to it in the show notes so that you can actually see what I'm talking about. Okay, well, thank you for listening to the Boat Galley podcast today. Hopefully, you learned something from us. In that case, don't miss out on an episode. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app.